Hi Year 12, this is the first video looking at the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. The poem was actually written in 1910 and then it was published in its first format in 1915. However, when it was first published, it wasn't well received, and then it was republished again in 1917. Now, looking at your screen, you can see a very busy poem that's been busily annotated. This is Miss Kang's writing for you. I did the talking and she annotated it as we went, and so I'm going to give you how I see the poem, the way I interpret it, and some other ways that you could look into it as well, and discuss the structure of it and what's going on in it. So to start off with, it is a dramatic interior monologue. It's in the mindset of the persona, and our persona is J. Alfred Prufrock. The poem both intentionally and unintentionally reveals a lot about the character of Prufrock. And so when he gives us this monologue, he's telling us a lot about himself, whether he intends to or not. Arguably, the poem is about the urban man living in contemporary society, or it's about contemporary man who is paralyzed by his own indecisions in his life. And so it epitomizes the frustration and impotence of the modern individual. Prufrock is quite disillusioned. He laments his physical and his intellectual inertia. He laments his lost opportunities in life, and is haunted by reminders of unrealized possibilities. He has regret, embarrassment, longing. And the poem itself, at a bigger level, represents sense of decay, awareness of one's own mortality. It's interesting that I was saying it's lament, because as we can see up here in our title, it's actually a love song. And so we have to ask, what is it about this that he uses this love song? How does it set the tone? Is it used ironically? Is it something else? And so we've got to be asking, why this musical term? Because when we look at preludes and rhapsody as well, they're also musical terms. But is it used ironically, or is it something else? Is it a love song, or is it something else? There's an ambiguity to it as well. The first name is just J full stop. We don't get the whole of the first name. There's a pompousness to it by using just the initial, but there is also that ambiguity there that is given to us in the title itself. Then we start with the epigraph, Dante's Inferno. The character of Dante's Inferno is in hell and confessing his sins. And so this part of the epigraph itself, this part of the poem, which is part of the poem, takes on a confessional tone. And then as we take that through into the stream of consciousness interior monologue that goes on in the structure of this poem, the whole poem then becomes a confession. In this moment here in the epigraph, we do have this sense that our character is in hell and he won't escape, and he promises he's not going to tell anyone, and yet he does escape. And then we have to ask, does Prufrock escape at the end? Is Prufrock speaking from his own private hell? Is modern society that very hell? Then we start with the let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go then, you and I, is also ambiguous. Who is the you? Who is he talking to? His beloved? Is this dramatic monologue a stream of consciousness, which we know is part of modernist poetry? Is he talking to himself? Is he self-divided? Then we take that and it's coupled through the simile with the patient etherized. Is it a real journey, or is it an imagined one? If he is addressing his beloved, then it is not a romantic journey. They're walking through half-deserted streets and one-night cheap hotels. One-night cheap hotels, the sawdust restaurants, and the sawdust is used to capture the slops and the liquor, suggests that perhaps we were in the red light district of the town, or at least in a debauched or poor end of town. Note the fact that there are oyster shells. If I just scroll down a bit, we have the oyster shells and sawdust restaurants and oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. I do not ask, what is it? And so through this, the oyster shells themselves littering the floor, then a known aphrodisiac, and they're just being overconsumed and thrown away. So when we're looking at this stanza, we're being invited to go on a walk that is contrasted against the patient that's etherized upon the table. So we are in a suspended state. Prufrock is in a suspended state. He wants to go out and do things, but he can't. We get the idea that we're in the undesirable, seedy side of town with the sawdust restaurants and the one-night cheap hotels. And then we get to this journey taking us to the overwhelming question and the tedious argument. We're not getting anywhere. We're going in circles. He doesn't know what the question is or how to answer it. The tedious arguments are the streets of the town. They're boring, they're superficial, and that's somehow taking us, these boring and superficial streets are somehow taking us to this overwhelming question. But what is the question? Prufrock tells us not to ask what is it and takes us to on a visit. He changes the subject and then brings that repetition, let us go, make our visit. It's the collective pronoun there as well, that we're on this journey together. It's a really strong visual imagery in this about the decay and the debauchery. It also feels quite claustrophobic in the way it's done as well. Is it actually an allusion to the moral bankruptcy of society? Is it part of Eliot's personal context where he was actually had a penchant for wandering around the towns and looking around the towns, which is what he did in America before he moved to Paris? Don't forget that Eliot's poetry is quite polyvalent, which is the words that are used have multiple meanings. It's one of the stylistic choices and features of Eliot's poetry. Then we have the refrain, in the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. It's fragmented in structure. The refrain or couplet appears out of context, but is referring to the intellectual discussions about art. The coming and going reduces the conversations of the women to the trivial, which is captured by the rhyme and rhythm that is in the couplet. So we start in hell, up in the epigraph, and then we move to the city part of town, and then in this fragment we're all of a sudden thrown into the upper class society. And so it gets this pseudo-intellectual flavour to it. The conversation of art has been degraded just as the poem suggests life has been. Then we get to stanza 2, and we're back to the streets again. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. So we're back on the streets. And then we have this yellow fog with the lexical chain there of soot, pools of standing water, and the yellow colour itself, which all combined together suggests pollution and something quite unhealthy. We get the extended metaphor of the feline, cat-like pollution. It's what we were calling in class our fog cat. Then you look at the lexical chains again of sleepy, drowsy, and other words throughout the poem. This sense that we're falling asleep, that we're not moving forward. So the fog cat itself then starts to represent alienation, sleep in, and death. So look at the links in the poem to death and sleep. Later on, we have John the Baptist and the pinned insect. We also have a reference to Lazarus and to Hamlet. Some critical readings suggest that this stanza alludes to a disturbing sexual desire of licking and rubbing that leads to inertia, a sense of impotence that comes about. And others state that it's actually a hallucination. We do get the sense, though, from it that this is industrialised London. We have the smoke and the fog going everywhere. So we have to ask, what do we know? How do we know that it's set in the evening and in autumn? We do know that it is. It tells us at the beginning of the poem. We're in evening, and later on it tells us that we're in October, October night, and seeing that it was a soft October night. So we're in autumn, we're in the evening, we're probably in London, and then we have this yellow smoke sliding along the street. Okay, I'm going to pause it here and then do a second part for you.